Hello everyone, this is Dave Drimmie from the Wealthy Wednesday podcast, and I am so excited to invite my guest on this week. He's just a very, very good friend, fabulous guy. He's really a cash flow expert for businesses, and you're going to want to listen to this again and again and again. James, how are you doing, sir?
Very well indeed, Dave. How are you?
Outstanding. Thank you very much. We've had a bit of a chilly break recently, everyone up here in Scotland, but I'm sure there's people listening to this in other parts of the world where it's far, far warmer. So absolutely thrilled you come to join us today because you have phenomenal knowledge when it comes to cash flow and helping business owners to actually improve their cash flow in a number of different areas, which I'm looking forward to dipping into today. So welcome, sir.
Thanks, Dave. No, it's a pleasure to be here. And you're absolutely right. I think there's a number of different ways that we can have a discussion with the businesses and just try and tap into improving the cash flow in some shape or form.
Fabulous. Now, listen, just so the viewers and listeners today actually have a bit of an understanding of your background. You currently work with a company called the Counting King, which is a wonderful organization. But before then, could you give us a quick 30, 60 seconds on your background that led you to the Counting King?
Yeah, sure, Dave. Well, I'm for my sins, former banker. Worked with a number of banking institutions such as RBS, Clydesdale. I've also worked in commercial finance with GE Capital, part of the General Electric group. And I've also been involved working in invoice financing with RBS Invoice Finance, Bibby Financial Services, and the last couple of years before I moved to County King, working with a company called Leighton, who are innovation funding consultancy.
Wow, outstanding. So literally you started in banking and you've migrated through a series of pathways, including invoice financing, and into what you specialize in right now, which I guess is a kind of it's a mix of all of them. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, Counting King business, has been trading now for nearly 3 years. Initially started out as looking at R&D only, but I think a lot of the businesses we speak to now, we're uncovering other areas where they're looking for assistance. So we're finding other tax relief services such as capital allowances, and land remediation, which for many of your construction clients, I'm sure that will be of interest. But right through to looking at things such as grants, innovation grants specifically. Anything that a business may have an innovative idea is looking for some level of funding. But we're moving right into debt financing as well. So accessing things such as business loans, asset finance, and invoice finance. So we've really got a full suite of products and offerings where we can support businesses.
That's outstanding. And when you talk about R&D, that's research and development tax grants. Is that correct?
Yeah, research and development tax credits. I would say it's the terminology is a bit misleading. I mean, a lot of the businesses we speak to, what the parlance I've kind of come to adopt over the last couple of years is, there's either the innovators and then there's the majority of businesses that we work with, which I would actually refer to as hidden innovators. So those could be businesses that are actually not aware that they're qualifying for this invaluable funding scheme by virtue of the fact that probably they just don't recognize themselves as being innovators. So the terminology is a little bit misleading in terms of research and development. It's probably a whole lot more than that. So it's really a lot of the businesses we speak to probably never come across the term, or they don't realize it's actually relevant for them.
I found this absolutely fascinating because when we first met, I had no idea about this, but I also discovered very, very quickly there's a lot of people jumping on the bandwagon, but they actually are only thinking about themselves as business owners, where you think very much differently. It's quite a holistic approach. You're really caring about the results of the business and the business owner. That's correct, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's always, I think in our market space, a lot of our competitors either do one or two of the things that we do. Don't look at the kind of, I don't really like that term, but that's what it is. That kind of holistic view and saying what's the right thing for the business. So sometimes we do speak to businesses that have looked at R&D, and we will always try and gravitate to, as I would like to call it, where we can get free money, for the client first, or money that they can get to without not going to consider, servicing that, or paying an interest or arrangement fee of any shape or form. If that isn't available to them and they don't qualify, then we can look at other forms of funding. But the good thing is about all these various forms of funding we can look at, all aiding cash flow, but very, in most cases, they can all work in tandem. So it's not, that you're having to choose one over the other. So, for example, we're speaking to businesses where the initial discussions about R&D, but actually it comes through in discussion that they're having a bit of an issue with cash flow in general. It's maybe a little bit slow, and they would like to accelerate that and take a bit more control over their own business's cash flow, and not be treated as one client said to me recently, not be treated like a bank by their customers, which is it's a very fair point.
So I think that's a common constraint nowadays with business owners. But I like the it's almost like the scales of balance. I remember you telling me a story about an architect who reached out to you just during COVID, actually, just to get a loan from you to be able to keep his business afloat and what have you. And I believe you asked him about R&D tax credits, and he thought there was absolutely no way he could actually be able to claim R&D tax credits. Could you share a bit about that story?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's not an isolation, Dave. We see this quite often. Unfortunately, there's a lot of misinformation about a lot of things, and R&D is no exception. This architectural business was wrongly informed by actually a very well-known advisor, so I'm not going to name here for obvious reasons.
Quite right.
But they specified that architects weren't eligible for the scheme because of the nature of their industry classification code or SIC code, which is actually totally incorrect. It's really about the activity that the business has done, and it's not sector by sector specific about who qualifies and who doesn't. So in that case was a really nice, particularly pleasing example of where a business came on looking for a much smaller amount of money than eventually we were able to access for them. I think from memory they were looking for originally a £25,000 loan. And actually, long story short, we were able to access 250,000 for them, which the better news was they didn't even have to repay that because it was legitimately their money.
That is a stuff. So they got a 10x on what they actually came to you for originally.
Yeah, the guy just couldn't quite believe it because obviously his trusted advisors had misunderstood the qualification criteria for the scheme. He trusted his advisors for a number of years and took it as read that they must know what they're talking about. So I think he was really pleasantly surprised. And even when he had the money, there was a few weeks where he was frightened to spend it and utilize it in his business because he just thought it's just too good to be true. And this is unfortunately some of the challenges we see in specific sectors. Construction is probably the number one sector. We have a lot of kind of surprise, maybe a bit of resistance to discuss the scheme because sometimes construction businesses, as we know, Dave, are very humble about what they do, and they just see it as business as usual. So in their mind, they're not going to be eligible for the scheme, or indeed they may have been misinformed as to what the eligibility criteria may be.
I still find it mystical in some respects. And obviously you've been involved in the sector for some time now. But just to unpack this a little bit, so anybody listening to this show understands what the R&D tax credits are and how they can be claimed. Could you take me through a process, for example, of how somebody could begin to claim these back?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very straightforward process, but it's the scheme's eligible. The eligibility for the scheme, you have to be a limited company. Or indeed a PLC, but for the majority of times we're speaking to businesses that are limited companies. The reason being is that limited companies have a corporation tax liability, and this falls under the remit of corporation tax adjustment, which R&D is one of those tools of tax efficiency, where a business that is liable for corporation tax may be able to get some of that money back if we can, we or advisors similar to us can demonstrate that the business has met the criteria as set out by HMRC. So HMRC, they are the judge and jury effectively as to what qualifies and what doesn't. I would say that because we deal with HMRC on a daily basis, we can see that the kind of the marginal nuances of what how the scheme may change. I mean, the scheme's really opened up over The last 20 odd years it's been in existence in the UK, it's gone from, what I would probably refer to as a white lab coat side of industry, right through to businesses that are clearly not white lab coats. The key thing is really looking for businesses that have undertaken challenging work, work that's got a degree of technical uncertainty, financial uncertainty, and something that follows a kind of logical sequence or process. Anything that follows those criteria, Dave, is really what we're looking to evidence. So you might have a business that is looking to try and develop something in a better way or a more efficient way. Something that's quite topical just now is the use of novel materials. And this is a parlance and terminology that's used by HMRC, where a business, let's say a construction business, may be using cladding materials, for example. Due to things such as Brexit, there may be a shortage of accessing that material. So the construction business may be having to find an alternative material to get the job done. So someone that's maybe got the same performance, the same performance delivery, shall we say, but not through the material they would normally use. So something that's probably taken down the route of using a non-standard process or non-standard material that you wouldn't normally find in that line of work. That then opens a whole can of worms in terms of how do we get the same performance measurements? Can we get the same thermal properties, same acoustics properties and such like? These are all leading businesses to then unwittingly fall into the area of research and development, where by virtue of the fact they're having to trial and error to try and get that different level of performance. This is where a lot of businesses are, and probably the first time that they're getting involved within the whole research and development arena. You do have businesses that are consciously looking to try and improve things, so maybe make something stronger, lighter, faster, etc. But when businesses are in many cases we see are in situations where they're literally having to come up with an out-the-box solution to get a job done. So maybe a client-led challenge. We see this quite a lot within oil and gas, and also within construction, where you might have a subcontractor working for a main contractor, and there might be specific requirements that main contractor has. Such as working within certain materials, using heritage materials or using eco-friendly materials or materials that have a certain performance characteristic that you wouldn't normally find in that line of work. So these are all areas that are leading businesses to then try and find a solution. And really the whole essence of the scheme is rewarding businesses that will continue to take on that technically challenging work. So it's not about success or failure. And again, that's one of the pieces of misinformation that's out there, that businesses will only be rewarded if they have a successful outcome, a particular project or job that they're working on. And even the label project can be misleading. So some businesses, again, I'm speaking with a business just now that's involved in working on heritage properties. When I use the term project to them, that they say, well, we don't have a project, we have day-to-day work. Well, that's fine. Day-to-day work also counts. It's not necessarily have to be labelled as a project. But probably the rough rule of thumb is, whenever I speak to a business for the first time in this, the projects that ended up taking weeks or maybe months, there's usually a clue there as to why that took so long. Something that was a bit challenging. There might have been a curveball. There might have been a lack of accessibility to certain material. There might have been an issue. Speaking with the business just now, has been involved in a civil engineering project that's dealing with a piece of land that's got an unusually high water table. So trying to deal with that wasn't something that they could envisage at the start of the project. So some of these curveballs will take businesses to a point where they have to try and do something a little bit kind of out-the-box thinking, and trying to have to do something that's maybe non-standard to get the job done. And in many cases, we're speaking to businesses where it's maybe taken several attempts to get that job done, and it's still not correct. But the scheme doesn't reward success or failure. Just to re-emphasize that, it's really rewarding activity. The key thing that HMRC are interested in, what are the struggles that business had to go through to try and get that job done.
I think it's becoming clearer to me now why you use the word innovation. And in the last year, am I correct? Since January, you and your small team have created another, was it 400 clients?
Yeah, we've brought on just actually 2 weeks ago, we just brought on our 400th new client to the business. So it's taken to put that in perspective, start of the year we had about 150 clients. So we've really gone great guns this year in terms of bringing new businesses in, and a lot of times it has been a mix of businesses I've never claimed before. They've either been wrongly advised that this doesn't apply to them, or in many cases it's businesses that have claimed with other advisors but maybe slightly unhappy with the process. So things such as impeding on their cash flow by the nature of how they would be billed for the preparation work for an advisor to enable a claim for them. That's maybe not been the most conducive way of working for their own cash flow. What we find is that there's a number of businesses that are looking for different ways where they're looking to bolster their cash flow or improve their cash flow. Because we've now got this broad range of products, it isn't always obvious to them that they should be speaking to us about R&D. So quite often they'll come to us and saying they want to have a chat with you about business loan. Now, business loan is a bit of a generic term. I think what a lot of businesses are looking for is some form of funding, and loan is almost like a generic term, a bit like Hoover. It's not really that's not what they're really after some form of funding. So we'll always explore this first and just see if there's something that's eligible. If there's not, then we'll just look at other forms of funding, whether it be a loan, whether it be asset finance, invoice finance. Or indeed, the big one that's been a big surprise for us in recent months has been capital allowances. So that's actually any investment that the business has made in the fixtures and fittings of its buildings. So it could be putting security systems, it could be putting lifts, it could be a number of things that are improving the fabric of that building. But in many cases, that's just untapped money. The businesses have no idea that they can recover a lot of that. Very good accountants who are switched on to capital allowances will pick up on that. But in our experience, we're coming across a number of industries where that's just not been exhausted at all. So always try and go to where the free money is, and this isn't by any minor means, embellishing anything or trying to do any sort of get into any sort of ambulance chase type scheme. Is really, if a business has got a legitimate claim for it, then we'll push that claim forward for them on their behalf.
I think from what I'm hearing, James, is it's almost like going into a GP with a cold, and the GP does a diagnosis of a situation and then prescribes appropriately. So somebody may come in, as you say, looking for a business loan, but maybe there's a more applicable funding route for them. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely, Dave. I mean, I think what a lot of businesses don't, and this is, I guess, where you asked me earlier about my previous experience. One of the things that I realized from a time that I spent working in banking is that it's not always easy to get the money from the bank for something like a loan. Certainly post 2008, that's become tougher. Everybody knows that. I think what's become even tougher now is that the fact that in many cases, since the government bailout money as well, has made it even harder now for businesses to know really what is the right form of funding for the right solution. And I think as well, what I would say is that the obvious routes that businesses usually will go to, which will be having a chat with their bank, maybe having a chat with their accountant, there isn't always that awareness of what possibilities might there be out there. Maybe just to get a snapshot. I know certainly from my time in banking, it was quite a narrow reach we had in terms of products. So there wouldn't be any sort of ability to look at things such as innovation grants, capital allowances, or R&D. Would be looking at pretty much the traditional, if you want to call that, traditional banking products. And those aren't always the best forms of funding for clients. It really depend on what is the right route for them. In many cases, a loan could just be, a sticking plaster to the situation and not really assisting that cash flow properly, not really helping that business in the longer term.
Sounds to me, I've had lower back issues for a couple of years, and I was getting advice from the NHS, from the physio department, which was it's almost like you've described there, going to the banks and getting kind of lame advice. And I've just recently taken on or paid for a sports physio who's just fantastic and is helping enormously. I've only had 3 sessions and it's fantastic, the movement and mobility I've got in my back. But that's about going to a specialist who knows exactly what they're talking about. And I hear some horror stories at the moment where there are people involved in the money markets, so shall we say, about advising business owners, and they give completely wrong business advice based on solely the commission rates that person's going to collect. So where there's money, my view is where people can make a quick buck, they'll always try and do that. So what makes you different from those people out there, James?
When it comes to tax relief products such as R&D, tax credits, capital allowances, land remediation, etc., we always work in a contingency fee. So from a client's perspective, there isn't actually going to be any cost until we deliver a service for them. But probably better than that, and this is what makes us different from a lot of our competitors, we'll not charge a client a penny until they've had the money back in their bank account, whether that be from an R&D claim or other tax relief service. So I think from a cash flow perspective, that's also reassuring from a client that they're not going to be, out of pocket before we've actually delivered something tangible for them.
Fantastic. So once the money's in their bank or is migrating to their bank, then you take your slice of the pie because the money is genuinely going into the bank account, and it's not like 6 months in advance of possibly coming to the bank account or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to sort of reiterate something that maybe makes us slightly different from many others in the R&D space alone. So we work as a sub-agent with our clients. That's our preference as a sub-agent for HMRC. Normally an accountant will be the main agent. We don't step in the accountant's toes. And that's probably clear to say we have no aspirations to be accountants. We are specialists. We do something different from accountancy. But when it comes to R&D, with that sub-agency, what that allows us to do is we know exactly when the clients had their claim paid out. We know when it's been successful and know when it's been paid out. So as soon as a client gets notified that they're going to be that money's now been paid that day, that's the point at which we will get in touch with them, and as you can imagine, politely ask for our fee to be paid, which will be on a 7-day invoice basis. So never before will we kind of get in touch and be looking for fees or any sort of upfront payment or anything of that nature. It's always after the event once the client's had that. So it's not impacting on their cash flow. And the other thing that's probably quite important to say as well, Dave, that fee is a fixed fee, and it's fully inclusive of, in the unlikely event there's a future inquiry from HMRC, we fully defend the client at no extra cost. And if the worst were to happen, touch wood, we've not had that yet, but we're not naive enough to think that eventuality may come one day. But if we lose a case with HMRC in that regard, we fully indemnify the client as well. So client's never out of pocket.
Fantastic. And I'm going to end on that with regard to what you're sharing there, actually, because I think it's so pertinent and it's very honourable what you and your company actually does, that you're actually genuinely serving your client so you can actually work with them again and again and again and build up a really good client working relationship. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, absolutely, Dave. And I think the other thing I should point out as well, again, just thinking about our tax relief services, we don't bind clients in for anything more than, the first claim with us. So it's really up to us to make sure we do such a great job that the client wants to work with us year after year. And unfortunately, what happens in our industry is a lot of clients are tied in for 4 or 5 years. And that's a big chance. You're going to take a bit of a risk, perhaps, working with a business you've never dealt with before and lock yourself in for 4 or 5 years. We would never want to do that. So it's really up to us to prove that, we can help and support the client, and the client wants to come back year after year and working with us without being bound in.
Outstanding. James, listen, I know you're tight for time. You're just going on to another client call to go and serve somebody else very, very shortly in the next few minutes. What I would love to do is if you could possibly share some details of how somebody could get in touch with you, perhaps an email address or a website or LinkedIn profile. How can somebody easily get in touch with you once they've listened to this podcast?
Yeah, so quite easy to get in touch with me. Our website is www.accountingking.co.uk, or my email address is james@countingking.co.uk. Telephone number is 07510 384 359. So happy to have a chat with any business. Because what we do very often, we have introductory chats with businesses. really just to kind of make sure that find out what they're looking for first and foremost, how we can support them, and then really see what we've got within our array of services that might be of interest. And importantly, what's going to add value. Because the last thing we want to do is to discuss a service or a facility with a client that's just not going to improve their business one iota.
Listen, I think that's fantastic because, like you, I'm involved in serving clients as well, and they come to me with problems, but ultimately they want a prize, and a prize tends to be freedom in many respects, financial and time freedom. But there's often a series of problems they have that people can't really help them with, or they don't think deeply enough. And it seems to me that you really do dive into helping those clients on a really, really deep level. And I know that it's not just about the commission for you, because one of my clients came to you asking for funding advice. They were looking to buy a hotel, and you immediately referred them very generously to somebody in your network who could serve them really, really well. So all the time you're thinking about how can I serve them in the best possible way, not how can I make commission off them. And I just, for that reason, I love referring people to you, because it's just, you're so good at what you do. Your team's amazing. The service is amazing, but you're not just thinking about the money. So thank you very much for joining us today. And folks, I would really encourage you to get in touch with James if at all possible, even just for an informal conversation. There are countless other stories I can share with you of James and his team's success stories. But James, once again, could you just give us your contact details in terms of email address and website?
Sure. Contact me at james@countingking.co.uk. Our website is www.countingking.co.uk. On our website, you'll find a number of different avenues that we can assist businesses with. And something that might be of interest to some of the listeners, we're the only company to our knowledge in the UK that has developed a grant finder tool. So any businesses that are interested in looking at innovation grants, every available grant in the UK right now is on that hyperlink, and you can actually filter it out by your industry, the amount you're looking to secure, etc. But we're delighted to assist any business that's looking at that or any other services at all. Or you can also call me on 07510 384 359.
Outstanding. I tell you what, you just saved an absolute peach of a gem for last there. So James, thank you very, very much. And folks, this is the bookend. James has been the bookend, thankfully, to our Crash series. And Crash, as you know by now, stands for build a cash buffer, reduce expenses, assets, and standing out, and then helping others. And I just want to thank James for really, really helping us understand how we can reclaim some really, really juicy amounts of money and really increase the cash buffer, just like the architect story we talked about earlier on. But also the H for helping. He's a warm, generous, caring individual, and I really encourage you to get in touch. So, James, thanks again. Really, really appreciate you joining us. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Dave. It's been a pleasure, and good to catch up as always.
Likewise.